All right, this is Personal Internet Security Basics, just in case you're in the wrong room, but you've been sitting here for a while, so you're probably not. My name is Dan Ficker. I'll talk about myself in a second. First, we're going to talk about just a little bit of things that we're going to go over. Just some ideas is just what is security, how can you be more secure in mostly your personal life, but some of these things will also apply to what you do as a profession, as a web developer. Let's see. Yeah, encryption is important. Passwords are very important, and we're going to talk a lot about those. And then, some other things like two-factor authentication, backups, and that type of thing. We're not too much about that, but we're going to at least touch on it. So my name is Dan Ficker. I'm a customer success engineer at Pantheon. It doesn't actually say Pantheon on there. That's funny. Okay. But that's just a little bit about me. Sometimes, apparently, I have a really long beard and long hair. Anyway, not today. Let's see. Yeah, we're going to talk about passwords for a lot of the time today. And this is just, we're going to start first with a personal story for me. Back in the day, I just kind of used to, on the internet 5, 10, 20 years ago, just use the same password for everything. And I've been hearing for a while, like, hey, that's maybe not the best way to do it. But I do actually have a fun example. Something was wrong about a year ago. I got an email from Netflix saying, hey, you changed your email. And I'm like, I did? I don't remember doing that. And so basically someone basically logged into my account. I tried to log into Netflix on my phone and my computer, and nothing works. My email address and password, my username just didn't work at all. I had to call Netflix and basically talk to them and say, hey, someone took over my account. They tried to verify with my email and my phone number, and they're like, nope, there's no account with that name or phone number. But when I gave them my credit card, they're like, oh yeah, you are paying for this this account, so we'll give you access back to it. So that's not something that you want to have happen if you can help it. And thankfully, we'll talk about later, it was just Netflix. But what fully happened was, like, earlier that week I got this email that basically said, hey, you've got this password that you put in this iPhone app that you bought like 10 years before, 8 and 9 years before, and we didn't actually store those passwords very well. And so, just so you know, they're out on the internet. Your password is out on the internet, and so maybe you should do something about that. Basically, just don't use that password, change your password wherever it is. And thankfully, at least Netflix was really the only place I hadn't already changed that password, mostly because I'm like, if I change that password, then I have to re-log into every single thing I have Netflix on, and, I'm a computer nerd, so I have a million different devices, and all of them have a Netflix app, and so, so I wanted to see, I was just playing this game and wanted to see what my score was, so that's why I signed up for an account. Turns out they didn't store my account information very well. That was back in 2009. I was just like, oh yeah, I'll just use my email address and that normal password I use for everything except for my bank. And turns out, not the best idea. So the big lesson here really is just don't use the same password for everything. And we'll talk about some good ways to do that. Sorry. It means you have to change your passwords on lots of stuff, and kind of have some way to manage all those passwords. And we'll talk about some solutions to do that here. The other thing that I think to take away from this story really is that your password just won't stay secret at some point. If it's a password that somebody can either easily guess or spend a bunch of time, trying a bunch of passwords on the computer, sooner or later they will figure out, hey, your password was, monkey123 or something like that, if it's something easy. Let's see. There's a great website. If you haven't been there yet, you can totally pull it up. It's just called Have I Been Pwned, Pwned, haveibeenpwned.com, and you can just put in your email address or even your password into a web page there, and it will just look up in these databases of lots of leaked information. This is actually the results of what I put when I put my email address in there, it says, yes, my email address was an Adobe account. It was in these kind of other breaches of just aggregate data from a lot of different other places. I had a Bitly account, a Dropbox account that were all compromised at some point, and it tells you even like your name, your password, and some other things might also be on the internet. So it's nice to be aware of this. I think I heard you could actually put your email address in there, and anytime your email address, you could sign up for an email notification. So anytime they add some new hacked information and your email address shows up in there. I definitely, on another page in there, there's a password section, and I definitely put in that one password that I had on my Netflix account until about a year ago, and it definitely said, yes, that password does exist in this store of passwords. So you can also try some other passwords that you might use and be like, oh, good, nobody knows exactly what this password is, or at least nobody has posted on the internet that this person has aggregated. So this is just a security researcher who says, I found these stores of passwords being shared around on the dark web, and so he kind of, anonymizes that data to the point where you can't actually just look up, exactly, or read through the whole thing. Maybe you can download it somewhere, but just lets you look through or find your information in there, or find if your information is there, basically. So yeah, your email address and your passwords might be, password for some account is probably in there if you pop in your information. And this means that hackers might be having them too. And one thing that really is going on now is, it used to be they just tried to guess a bunch of passwords, guess random words, guess kind of things. And now they're actually, with all this information that they have, the hackers are kind of saying, hey, let's actually guess the most common passwords on these lists, or let's guess, all the passwords we can guess, which might be get us more results. In my case, actually, too, they probably also said, oh, he has this email address and this password. Let's just try it on any other thing we can. So they probably tried logging into Gmail with it. They probably tried to log into Apple with it. And thankfully, again, I didn't have the same password everywhere, so it was not too much of a problem. So we're going to talk about, I think, ways to do better passwords. These are pretty basic, but they should probably have alphanumeric characters, even some special characters. I'd say they should be really random, because if it's just a bunch of words or a word and then a couple numbers, that's pretty easy to guess. The idea is that if you have really long random passwords, and say long 20 to 30 characters, and if they're unique for each site, then if the password gets out, it says, oh, hey, Dan's password is this really long random thing, then they can't try it on other websites if it's different for each website. And even according to this government recommendation from the National Institute of Standards from 2017, it actually even says really that you don't, if everyone is using these long random passwords and some sort of system to manage those and keep track of them, then you probably don't even need to change your password every couple months, or but maybe that's also a good idea to do from time to time as well, to change it, just because if it does get out there, then every once in a while you're changing it, and that would keep someone out of there. But we're going to get into a little bit of an aside, not talking about passwords for a minute, but talk about encryption, because encryption is also important to keeping your data secure. So, so basically, anything on the internet, when the internet started, it was just a list of like public information, just lists of, resources on the web. Encryption basically is a number of different types of kind of secret codes that you say, hey, I'm going to change everything into this certain secret code that no one else knows, but I already told you about it, so you can then decrypt that information. There's a couple different types of encryption. The first one is kind of one-way encryption, or hashing. Basically, even here on the right, I have put password 1 into I think it's an SHA-1 algorithm, and it came out with this very random looking hexadecimal string down at the bottom. There's something like that. No, actually it's an alphanumeric string, but yeah. So basically, it came out with that, and that's this is a one-way encryption function. So if you have that string at the bottom, you can't actually find out that the password is password 1 by any easy means. But when you go into a website and type in your password and type in password 1, it can do the same sort of in one-way encryption thing and say, do these things match? And so that's actually how Drupal does store your password information. It does a couple extra things to kind of add some more randomness to just your password. But basically, when you type in your password and say, hey, I think this is my password, it will actually do that same encryption algorithm and then just see, do those things match? Does this match the one that's in the database? And if it says no, you don't get in. If it says yes, then it says, okay, you're clear to log into your Drupal site. So, yeah. So I think I covered all that. Yeah. But this type of encryption doesn't work for everything, because sometimes you're not just verifying that you know the right thing. You're actually trying to keep that information and get it back somehow. So that's where we come to public key encryption. So in public key encryption, you have a public key and a private key, and I have a little diagram on the next slide. The public key is something that can be given out to everyone, and it's an encryption system that basically you can encrypt or decrypt things made with the private key. So the private key then you keep very, very, very secret, because if anybody gets it, then they can basically impersonate you. Let's see. Yeah, and this is how a lot of the information is transmitted across the internet. So on computer 1, have encrypted data, unencrypted data, and on computer 2, we want to also have an unencrypted data so you can read it. If you just transmitted that over the internet, basically anybody who is listening or is kind of watching the traffic go by on the internet, actually right now, there's a good example. So right now, if you're on the Wi-Fi at the university here, any website you visit, probably anyone else in the room with a radio could actually look and go, hey, that computer is visiting that website. Any sort of antenna on the computer, because it is not encrypted at all, and so they could at least tell which websites you're visiting, what kind of traffic is coming in and out of your computer, and that's maybe not that bad if you're just visiting the MidCamp site. But if you want to do more encrypted information, there's a number of different ways you can encrypt data. But I'll mention that later. But also on Wi-Fi networks that actually have a password, there's usually more encryption. Although sometimes it's not the best encryption anyway. But yeah, so don't want to just send sensitive data just across the internet unencrypted. So what you actually do is both ends agree, let's encrypt the data, and actually this would not be a browser, I wrote this wrong, look at that. This would be the server would have a private key that no one would know, but the server would then give the public key to any other computer, and so it would encrypt the information with this private key, and then any public person with the public key could then decrypt it. So basically, it could also, the person with the public key then can also say, hey, I'm going to encrypt this information, send it through the encryption algorithm, and then send it across the internet when it's encrypted, and the other computer with the private key can then decrypt that information. I hope that makes some sense, but yeah. So that's basically when you have encryption happening, this kind of public-private key encryption, this two-way encryption, it basically looks like kind of random data just transmitting across the internet. And somebody's like, I don't know what that is. It just looks like a bunch of randomness that I can't read, and so that's a good thing, because no one else is reading what you're sending across. And this is actually, so we'll talk about it. What types of ways are you using encryption already or not? So a big one is if you're visiting a website, even like the MidCamp website, I believe most websites these days do have HTTPS, is a version of transmitting websites over SSL encryption. So HTTPS, I think the S actually does stand for secure, but I could be wrong about that. But yeah, so whenever you see that padlock or that message that says you're using a secure certificate and a valid certificate, between your browser and the server, it's agreeing we know these kind of secret things and we're sending it encrypted. And the good thing is these days, in the last couple years, almost every website is starting to use HTTPS, and this protects you a number of things. This verifies that you're getting actually what you expect from the server. Your internet service provider or anybody that's kind of passing the traffic along in the middle could, if you don't have HTTPS, they could be adding or modifying information. And mostly it's been Google and some other companies that have said, hey, we think everyone should be using HTTPS. Let's encrypt, in some other companies, for all their websites, all the websites on the internet. And for the most part, I think that's a good thing, just because you then know that you're getting the information you're looking for and not some modified information. This is a little bit changing, that the browsers show a padlock next to the thing. Usually there's some sort of padlock. It's more actually now changing to, if you don't have a SSL certificate, they give you a big message next to the browser URL that says like not secure or something like that. And giving you more and more warnings if you're submitting information over a non-secure connection. Let's see, I think I covered a couple of these things as well. Anything can be copied? Yeah. Yep. And so one thing that's important to remember too, as a Drupal developer, is if you are logging into a website over a non-HTTPS connection, like, most of the people could be actually seeing your password as you submit it, and, or at least getting it in a pretty easy way. And most likely, there's nobody, I guess especially if you're at home on your ISP or at your office, most likely there's no one in your internet service provider's company that's looking at this traffic and saving a copy and saying, ooh, what kind of information can I look through for this? Maybe at a coffee shop, or on a large university campus, maybe, I don't know. Maybe there are some more nefarious people that want to actually get some of the information and say, oh, what can I do with this? And so that's maybe another place to kind of decide, do I want to use encryption? Yes. And am I ready? Am I actually sending my information encrypted or not? And as I mentioned before a little bit, I like on the iPhones and the iPads now, if you look in the Wi-Fi settings, it actually does give you a big warning saying, hey, this Wi-Fi network does not have encryption, and so your information could be, if it's not encrypted in another form at another place, then it is actually being sent in the clear over the internet. That's one thing that's a little hard to tell. These days with phones and apps and stuff like that, many of them, and I think most of the app stores these days do recommend or almost require that data is sent over HTTPS or some sort of encryption, but it's hard to tell too if that actually is happening, because there's usually there's no standard for a little padlock that's happening up there. But I think in general you can trust that that's happening. I would just also note a couple things. The email protocol is really not that secure either. I think companies like Google and things, if you're just sending it between Google and Google, that they have a pretty secure system. If you're sending it from Google to Hotmail or something like that. It's possible that, I don't understand all the email protocols these days, but I know back in the day it was probably not send over an encrypted connection, and I don't think there's been a change to the email protocol that requires everything to be encrypted. So generally, if you're sending something over email, again, maybe no one's actually looking at it because it's just a bunch of, there's millions of emails that go everywhere every day, and nobody's really looking through all that potentially, but they could be. Another one, FTP is a pretty popular way to kind of move files around, and that again also is not encrypted. That's why at Pantheon we only really let you connect in via SFTP, which is an SSH encrypted connection where you can then upload and download files. So there's just a number of places where encryption is or isn't being used, and maybe find other ways to use things that could be a little bit more encrypted if you're using some of those tools. A big one here, we're getting back to passwords, is a password manager. And so what is a password manager? It's basically just a piece of software that is a data store of all your passwords. And generally it encrypts that on your computer, and a lot of these services I'm going to talk about will actually put that encrypted store of data up on the internet so that you can easily access it from all your devices. Another thing that's very helpful that we'll get to too is these things help you generate kind of random passwords and also help you log in to all your websites. So the idea is kind of you have maybe one password, or just one major password that gets you access to all of your other passwords, a larger store of passwords. Here's just a number of. Let's see. I thought, okay, there's a couple different things, and they all have pretty much the same features. One that I use is called LastPass, and they do have a version of it that's free, I think, on desktops, and maybe you have to pay for a premium to use it on some phone features or something. I do actually pay for the premium, I think, even though maybe I don't have to, because I also like to support the people that provide the software for me. And at 20 some bucks a year, it's really not the most expensive way to deal with this. These prices were, I think I haven't updated them too recently, maybe about a year ago or 9 months ago. That's what I thought the prices were. If you use a lot of Apple devices, there is iCloud Keychain as kind of a system for syncing all that. And then also KeePass, KeePass, PASS, is an open source project that you can download and provide your own cloud, basically. Somehow sync this information between all your devices, but then keep it in an encrypted store. Like I said, I use LastPass, 1Password. It mostly started on Mac, but I think now they have more and more apps for all the different devices. Both the LastPass and 1Password, at least, do have browser plugins for all the major browsers, even some desktop apps or desktop apps for like Mac, and you can also log into their website and view any of the information in your password store as well. So that's a big overview of the features. There is first, plug-in integration with all the common browsers. If you have the latest version of iOS on your phone, your iPhone, or your iPad, that it's built into the OS, that you have a password manager now, you can turn on connection to LastPass or 1Password, and it just says, you want to log in with this, and it actually does the browser fill in right there. So that even works. That works very well. It basically on the browser plugin. If I actually log into any website and it says, I have never seen this password before, or this account, do you want to save it to the password store? And you just say yes. And then it'll try to detect when you update the password. It does offer a random password generator so that you can, and when you create a new account too, it just says, hey, it looks like you created a new account. on a website, you want to put in this random password that we just generated, and it gives you lots of options to say, I want 20 characters, I want 30 characters, I want numbers and stuff, because sometimes you have to tweak it a little bit, because sometimes password or accounts on the websites are saying you have to do it this certain way. Another thing that I definitely like is that there's a notes area in all these systems. You could put a little number of other information to do with the account. I definitely, if there are security questions, will actually, put what the security question I selected was, and even make up a fake answer that doesn't really make any sense, because somebody could probably look up my mother's maiden name or where I was born or something if they really wanted to get into my account. And so usually I'll come up with, you could put a random string of letters and numbers. Generally, I'd say sometimes on the phone, when you call into these companies, and if you have a problem with your account, they'll want to know the answers to these secret questions. And so what I've been doing actually recently is just using a website on the internet, just a random word generator, and putting like 4 or 5 words in the answer that I can then keep in my notes in my password manager, so that if they say, hey, what's the answer to the question, what town were you born in, I'll give them 5 words that match what they have on their screen, and they'll probably think I'm a little weird because I didn't actually answer the question, but it's a more secure way, I think, of managing that. That's really a big part of password managers, yeah.
Well, another thing a password manager will do, if you already have a list and put it in there, it'll go through an audit and tell you which ones have the same password.
That's another good point. Yeah, they will often give you that option to say, hey, do you want to check and verify all these passwords all the same, or are there a bunch of accounts with the same password? Sometimes, especially if you're a web developer, you might actually have the same website on your local machine and on the internet somewhere, so maybe they do actually have the same password because you just didn't bother to change it, from one environment to another. But it is a very good idea to say, hey, oh yeah, look, I do actually have this password used in 3 or 4 different places. Maybe I should change a couple of those. And I think it does also recommend that, because it is kind of this high security one password that you can have to remember to get access to everything else, it does maybe recommend that you change that every once in a while. I don't think you'd want to change all your passwords too often. Hopefully you don't have to, but changing the password that gets into all your passwords, just make sure it's something you can remember. Yeah, that's good tip. Another part of what you can do to be more secure with your password manager and other things is using some multi-factor authentication. Yeah, there's different types of authentication, and there's kind of these 3 different big areas. There's something like a password or an access code, a PIN number. There's something you have, like a card or a token or a fob or something like that. And then something you are, like a fingerprint or the iPhone uses, like on the newest iPhones, like a Face ID kind of thing, so they verify that it looks like your face, I guess. And in the science fiction movies these days, it's you get a little pinprick and get your DNA and verify that yes, that's you. So maybe someday, not here too much, but there's different ways you can use these other factors. One, like I mentioned on like an iPhone, instead of actually putting in your password, which if you're going to be secure, it probably should be kind of a long password and not just a 4 or 6 digit PIN number. If you're going to put in your password, it can take a couple seconds, and it's not the funnest thing to type in the world, but you could use something like the Touch ID or Face ID or a fingerprint of some sort in order to get you logged in faster. And let's see, yeah, I think it's a nice way to kind of have convenience and security at some point, at the same time, basically. So you did put in your password sometime in the last, hours or days, but you don't have to put it in again. You can just do some other verification that says, yes, I'm still that person who just put the password in a little bit ago. and that can be good enough. I think the one reason that they at some point will fall back to the password is if you've tried a number of times and you don't succeed, then it might say you can't actually use this factor anymore. You actually have to kind of go back to the usual password. The one thing that can happen, I think, is there's at least some legal parts in the U.S. that say you could be kind of coerced or forced to give your face or your fingerprint or something like that, because it isn't something that you legally have the right to say, no, I'm not going to give you that information. It is kind of more public information of who you are to some extent. And so that's one reason that maybe you don't want to use that as your main factor of information, but yes, then let's see. The second is another way to improve security is two-factor authentication, which means that both of these different factors, your password and another factor of verification, would be required to access. And this is more secure because, well, just as I have a long, complicated password, and you have to know that, and also have this other thing that I have that I carry around with me that isn't very easy to get a copy of. So, yeah, even if they get your password, then they still don't have this other thing that they need to get into your system. I guess I was going to, there's a number of different ways to do that. I actually have, this is a fob called like YubiKey, just on my keychain, and when I log into LastPass, I have to give my password, but then also kind of plug this in and tap it, or this one also is NFC, so I can just pair it with my phone or kind of tap it up against my phone, and it will actually verify that as well. So there are a lot of different ways to do that type of thing. Your Google account and your Facebook and Twitter accounts will have an option there to say you have to open the Google, Facebook, Twitter app on this one phone device that you currently have, and it verifies you, type in a code, that type of thing. And those are another way of kind of verifying that that you at least have this device that you said you would have when you try to log in at a new place. Let's see. Oh, yeah, I've got a number of other items here. Let's see. Yeah, I'm not forgetting anything here. Okay. Again, kind of about that kind of verification that you are who you say you are. There's some problem to some extent that the phone numbers, can be a little bit unsecure. I've seen and heard recordings of calls with customer service where someone says, "Hey, I'm this person. I can't get in my account right now. Can you help me?" And makes a very convincing case that they are that person, but they're not actually that person, and somehow then they get access to this other person's telephone account. They get a SIM card with their name on it, or they get it transferred to their device. And so if you have it set up to say, send me an email, or when I log in, send me a code and text it to me, they could somehow actually get this information. Also the phone system is a very large international system that doesn't really have that much security. It could be it could be that somebody who works at the phone company could just get your information, or get your phone number and get a copy of access to your account. And so generally using something like a software thing that is on your phone. The other thing that happens that can be useful very often is Google offers like a Google Authenticator, which is just a system that kind of gives out, and then there's a number of other companies that offer this Authenticator app on your phone, where it basically just gives out kind of random numbers. Instead of actually getting this here, it would actually get to you, sent to your phone number. It would just say, open your Authenticator app, and there will be 6 numbers in there, and verify that is the number you're expecting. So that's a time-based kind of verification code. Don't do that. I mean, you can do that, I think, if the SMS text thing works very well, but I don't think it's the most secure way to do it. There is often other options. I know with the LastPass and 1Password, at least LastPass, I know they give dozens of options really for yes, you could use Google Authenticator, you could use this YubiKey that I have. You can use the LastPass has their own authenticator built into their iOS app and other mobile apps. And so they give you a lot of options to say, yes, I want to actually use these other different factors of authentication in addition to the password. You can even set 2 or 3 of them, and so if you only have one, if you don't have the thing that you usually have with you, then you can fall back to using something else. I think one thing to note about this too is when you get a new phone, if you have one of these types of apps on your thing or on your phone that helps you verify, it doesn't always get transferred over with all your phone information because it actually is stored in kind of this private information area on your phone that doesn't actually get transferred over all the time. So I would recommend, when you get a new phone, maybe make sure you still have the old phone available to kind of verify you in order to log in, and then actually set up verification on your new device. So that you don't want to lock yourself out of that type of thing. But that also brings, I think, another good point to this too, is the weakest link in this type of situation is what do they allow you to do if you don't actually have this second factor available? If I don't actually have this fob in my pocket or this little YubiKey thing in my pocket, can I still get into my account? And so I have it set up, yes, I have the Google Authenticator app as my kind of backup. But, if you don't actually have it, do they just say, oh, hey, we'll email you this or we'll text you this? And if that's, basically anyone who wants to get into your account can always, and this happens for also the forgot password type of thing too, but anyone who wants to get in your account, if they just have this option to say, oh yeah, no, I don't actually need to know your password, I can just tell them your mother's maiden name and where you're born. And then it makes it pretty easy for them to get into your account and change your password to be whatever they want. So it's a good idea to be at least aware of what kind of what ways are getting around these secure passwords you're making, and maybe talk to the account provider and say, hey, I'd rather that you don't offer this because it's not that secure, or like I said, maybe make some sort of questions that don't really have the answer everyone's expecting, but it's something that let's see, I think that's I went through this pretty fast, I guess, but this is this is most of what I wanted to go through. I think this is just kind of a couple different ideas here at the end. So I think a big part of security is just also realizing that you have to trust various people with your information. Well, at least you probably do have to trust at least a little bit. Your internet service provider, your phone provider, any iCloud or any cloud service providers, you have to kind of trust that they have, to some extent, your best interest. If you're using something like an open source system, then maybe you can verify throughout that you don't have to actually, that you're encrypting information before it actually gets to any sort of provider. But the company that makes your phone, the company that stores your email and that type of information, hopefully they're encrypting it and they are making it hard for their employees to just look at your information and that type of thing. Let's see, I think there is a certain amount of if you can actually encrypt all the data before it gets to those kind of service providers, then to some extent you don't have to really trust anyone. I think at least it may be a little bit hard to verify this, but LastPass says basically, and 1Password too, they actually say, hey, if you forget your password, we have this random looking data, encrypted data on our server. but we really can't get it back if you don't have this password. And they actually will recommend, like, hey, you print out this sheet that is kind of one-time access codes in order to recover it if you do actually forget your password. And that can be a good idea. I'd recommend you store that in a very safe place if you do print that out. But that's definitely one way to. They want to make sure you can get into your account, but also that you don't really have a way to come to them and say, hey, I got locked out. But because I don't remember it and I need your help. And they might, if it's this kind of situation where they say, hey, we don't even really have that information, we can't help you. And it's good to be aware of when that's happening and when it's not. This is nice when you don't have to trust that everyone has your security in mind, but there's also a big downside to that is if you actually do forget the important information or lose it, then you also lost all this information that was being stored there. So, like I say, with great power comes great responsibility. I think someone else said that before, but yeah. And just closing on the end here too is just back up your data. If you have important data, in order to keep it secure, put it somewhere in more than one place, really, that will ensure that like data is not just completely wiped out. And yeah, if you don't have that, then if something terrible happens, then your data might be gone forever. Have a backup plan. Back it on site as well as off site, and maybe even put a copy of it in a safe deposit box or a vault or something. I don't know if you really want to make sure it sticks around, because sometimes data disappears. And I think that's mostly what I wanted to talk about, and I think I went through that pretty quickly. So. I don't know if anybody has any questions and other ideas for security. I think this is kind of what I had for just help improving your security personally. But we could also talk about security in Drupal or something if you want to. I don't know a ton about that, but I think I know a bit. So
you have a question back here?
Yeah.
So there's two types of people I kind of realize who don't have very good passwords, and one of them are older adults in my life, and the other one is clients. A lot of my clients will just send me like, okay, can I have, we need a password to sub for something for your site, and they send it over Gmail, and it is not secure at all. And I wonder, there's sort of an etiquette around suggesting that passwords are insecure that I find challenging encountering with these people when I've got bad passwords. And I was wondering if you or anyone has any good guidance on that.
That's a good question. I think. I think there's definitely a certain amount of like you don't want to just say, hey, you're really doing this wrong, but like just nicely saying this is something that I think I do occasionally sometimes maybe send customers a password via email, but I think if you do that, say, hey, you should definitely change this afterward, or sometimes there's even options to within the software say after they use this once, then they actually do have to change this and that type of thing. So I think it just comes down to nicely educating them to say, hey, there might be a better way to do this. But I don't know if anybody else has any good ideas too.
I work in a public library, so I work with a lot of the older public, a lot of people who do not have good password. And honestly, the best thing I've done with older people, the best I've been able to do is say, if you can't make it random, at least make it long. So I would recommend use a line from a movie, use something that they can remember, make it long.
Yeah, that is a good one. Yeah.
So that at least it's something they can remember, but at least it's the longer they make it, the more secure it probably will be, even if it's not completely random. And we kind of have I have the same problem with my coworkers, honestly. They email me their passwords. So a lot of times I'll be like, when I'm requesting information, please do not email me your password. Just as if I preempt them with that information, then sometimes they will remember to bring it to me another way. So
for the recording, and if I just capture that real quickly, but if you for the password, if it's not at least very random, maybe make it very long, have a long phrase, that type of thing, and that can be very helpful, I think. Yeah, for I'm not sure that it helps too much in that like you still have to. I mean, I think most people, even non-tech people, still have a lot of different accounts, and so I would think you still want to have some way to remember like where you use this password, even if it's a nice long password, and kind of. I think that's why I think a password manager is probably still the best solution, but and I think the big message is really saying, hey, this isn't that hard to do. It's not expensive. It's not a lot of work. I mean, it's a little bit more work, but there's obviously a trade-off between being somewhat secure and having convenience. And I think it's a little bit easier than they think it is, maybe. So, yeah.
I've seen something that's like a middle ground before. I can't remember the name of the tool, but there are some things that are used to like send one-time encrypted passwords. So it's not as good as using a password manager, but it's better than sending it in Gmail.
I've had someone suggest when they work with older people who are not computer savvy, if they're not, they generally will have like an address book. So he would tell them to write their passwords in their address book. Mm-hmm. And and that way they can have more than one account. They'll have it in a place that's secure and easy for them to access and remember.
Yeah.
If they're not computer savvy.
That's definitely, I think, a good option to have it written down somewhere, but you just have to be aware that like it's definitely a bit of a security risk if you're carrying that around all the time, or if you are if everyone knows all your passwords are in there, and so.
Like I said, generally someone who is not.
Yeah, no. If it's not someone.
One password would be over the top for it.
Yeah.
Will be another.
If it could be over the top
alternative.
Storing that password, written out somewhere. It's a good idea. Yeah.
And one other thing I wanted to mention also about Wi-Fi is you can get VPNs for your devices.
That's true. Yeah,
that
VPNs.
Will encrypt wherever you're at.
Yep. The VPN basically kind of encrypts the data and sends it to somewhere else that is probably more secure than where you're currently at. So, the VPN would go back to your house or back to a VPN service somewhere, and it would encrypt all the data between your computer and that point, and then send it out as if it's coming from there. So, Oz.
Do you have any suggestion for tools to be able to judge how secure your system might be?
Tools to judge. That's a good question. I think I think it depends on. You're talking about just overall general system.
Yeah, like as I'm sending things out. To be able to test my system, just even locally, like see how is there a way, or do you know of any tools to see that data flow?
I mean, there are definitely tools that you can download that will basically act as kind of some sort of a traffic sniffing tool, kind of like what hackers may be using, I don't know. But so something that actually looks at, is actually somewhere on your network and says, oh, I can see all this traffic moving through. And so that could be something, I guess, to see, identify what actually is leaving your network and what state it's in. That's probably a lot of data to go through. I think there's a lot of different tools for different places. Actually, let's see. I do have one more slide, actually, and this is actually a good spot to remember it. One of the places that I learned a lot of this information, actually, is from this guy named Steve Gibson. He's a security researcher at his website, grc.com. He does have a lot of little security tools. He's got like a port scanning tool that will scan the ports on your network, on your device, and say, hey, which of these ports can you actually see from the internet? He's got a tool about how the internet or the DNS can be, or how fast your DNS is, and maybe how secure the DNS information is. DNS is not too secure either, but that's another story. But yeah, he's basically a security researcher developer, and with the Leo Laporte and the Twit Network, they do actually have a weekly podcast where they talk a lot about various security issues. If you go back to some of the earliest ones, they even talk about just the basics of like, what is the internet, what is security, and they've been doing it for like 13 plus years now. So, but yeah, he's got a lot of, he's got a fun little idea for a tool too for it's using QR codes for logins on websites. So instead of actually using a username and password, even it actually just uses a QR code or kind of it's a very interesting idea, and I'm not sure. I mean, I think it's pretty good. It'll just be a good question is like, does that really replace passwords for lots of people when it actually is really available? But so I think there's a lot of tools out there. I mean, if you want to talk about the security of the SSL certificate on your website, there's like SSLlabs.com. It's a place where you can kind of scan the SSL certificates and information on your web server setup and say, hey, is this actually secure? So I think there's a lot of different options there, and it might be just I don't think there's one tool that just says this is going to check all of your security, but unless somebody else has a good idea. But so I think even with Drupal websites and that type of thing, there is ways to add tools that say, hey, make it required that everyone has to reset their password on the website, or look at kind of the complexity of those passwords as people are entering them, and so I think it there's definitely security tools for lots of different things, but it really depends on what exactly you're looking to check the security on, I think. So anybody else? Well, thanks for coming out, and if you want, you can rate the session, give me some honest feedback. I don't know, if you want to come tomorrow to Contribution Day, even if you don't know anything about really writing a code or PHP, it's always good to have contributors that we could always use help with contributing documentation and coming up with other ideas too. So improving Drupal in many different ways. So please come out to that. Thanks.